Let's talk about something we don't always want to name, but many of us have faced narcissistic relationships. And no, I'm not talking about some clinical diagnosis tossed around in a comment section. I'm talking about the deep manipulative patterns of people who weaponize charm, twist truth, and chip away at our self-worth in silence. The truth is, narcissists don't fear confrontation, they fear clarity. They don't crumble under resistance, they crumble when they no longer control your narrative. Manipulation doesn't begin with deceit, it begins with fog, a slow creeping distortion of your perception. It's not always obvious. In fact, that's what makes it dangerous. It's subtle, it disguises itself as charm, as concern, even as love. Over time, it rewires how you see yourself and how you relate to truth. Narcissists know this well. They're master illusionists, not by creating magic, but by distorting your reality. They ask questions that aren't really questions. They deny things you saw with your own eyes. They reframe their cruelty as honesty and your hurt as overreaction. And before long, you start editing your truth to fit their comfort. But then something powerful happens. You get clear. Not louder, not angrier, clearer. You stop negotiating with their confusion. You stop doubting your gut. You stop asking, am I too sensitive? And start asking, why am I tolerating this? Clarity cuts through manipulation like light through fog. It reveals the shape of what's really happening. You begin to name things: gaslighting, projection, emotional abuse, not to shame, but to liberate. You stop personalizing their behavior. You stop defending yourself against accusations that were never grounded in truth to begin with. Clarity restores your internal compass. It doesn't mean you have all the answers. It just means you finally trust yourself to know when something is off. And that is what narcissists fear most. Because once you can see them clearly, they can no longer control you. Manipulation only works when you're unsure of your worth, but when clarity enters the room, you reclaim your power, your voice, and your sense of reality. You stop asking, why are they doing this, and start deciding, I don't have to stay. That's when their control shatters. Not because you expose them to the world, but because you stopped letting them rewrite your story. And that right there is the beginning of freedom. Explaining becomes a survival tool when you've been around someone who constantly questions your intentions, your boundaries, even your basic needs. You explain not because you want to be understood, but because you're trying to stay safe. Because somewhere along the way, they taught you that your no needs a full backstory, that your feelings require evidence, that your truth must be softened until it's palatable to them. And so you over-explain, you rehearsed, you justify, you try to find the perfect words that won't make them withdraw or explode or accuse you of being too much. But here's the truth. Explanations become apologies when they're handed to the wrong person. Narcissists aren't looking for clarity, they're looking for control. Every time you explain, they twist it. Every reason becomes ammunition. Every boundary becomes negotiable. And over time, your voice becomes quieter, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're exhausted from saying it 100 times and still being ignored. To stop explaining what they've already decided not to hear. Stop handing over your truth like it's a permission slip. A boundary is not a debate. A feeling is not a courtroom defense. Your needs are not a negotiation. The people who are meant to walk with you won't need a PowerPoint presentation to respect your no. They won't require emotional disclaimers before you express something real. They won't ask you to shrink so they can feel big. The act of no longer explaining yourself is not cold, it's not cruel, it's clear, it's self-respect. It's you saying, I trust myself enough to know I'm allowed to exist as I am. Let them misunderstand you. Let them label your silence as arrogance or your boundary as rejection. That's their narrative. You don't need to sit on the witness stand of someone else's story. Because the moment you stop explaining, you start reclaiming. You reclaim your peace, your time, your worth, and eventually your life. There's a quiet ache in being misunderstood, especially by someone you once loved, trusted, or built a life around. We're wired for connection. We want to be seen, heard, and felt. And when that connection is met with distortion, denial, or dismissal, it can feel like emotional starvation. Narcissists use that longing like a weapon. They dangle false hope. If you just explain better, I'll get it. If you say it the right way, I'll change. You quickly learn the truth. They don't misunderstand you because you're unclear. They misunderstand you because it benefits them. They twist your words because clarity threatens their control. They reduce your hurt to drama or overthinking because empathy would cost them too much power. And so you try harder. You over-explain. You beg for them to hear you, to see you, to understand you, not because you're weak, but because you believe deep down that love should come with mutual recognition. But here's where healing begins. You don't need their understanding to honor your truth. Attachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop tying your worth to someone else's perception. You no longer accept emotional crumbs while starving for dignity. You stop breaking yourself into digestible pieces to make someone else feel whole. When you detach from the need to be understood, you reclaim your power. Because understanding was never the issue, respect was. And no amount of explaining will earn respect from someone who thrives on making you doubt yourself. It's not your job to translate your pain into their language. It's not your responsibility to make someone see your value when they're committed to overlooking it. Detachment is not giving up. It's choosing to no longer bleed for someone who won't stop cutting. It's courage. It's clarity. It's the quiet act of self-trust. So give yourself permission to walk away, unheard, unseen, even misrepresented, and still whole. Because the truth is, you don't need to be understood by them. When you finally understand yourself, fighting a narcissist feels like running a race where they move the finish line every time you get close. You think if you just say the right thing, prove your point, defend yourself clearly enough, they'll finally get it, they'll change, they'll care. But the goal was never understanding, it was dominance. And the longer you stay in the fight, the more of yourself you lose, trying to win a battle that's rigged from the start. You raise your voice, and they call you unstable. You cry, and they say, you're manipulating them. You stay calm, and they say, you're cold. There is no winning, only losing your peace in pieces. So the real rebellion, the most powerful thing you can do is to stop fighting. Not because you're weak, but because you're finally wise. Fighting keeps you locked in their game. Healing writes you a new story. The narcissists want a reaction. They feed off of emotional energy, positive or negative. They want you to argue, plead, yell, beg, because as long as you're reacting, you're still in it, still entangled, still proving you care. But when you choose healing, you step out of that loop. You stop defining your strength by how well you survive their storm. You realize that peace isn't passive, it's a decision, a radical one. Healing is not about forgetting what they did. It's about choosing to no longer relive it every day. It's about reclaiming your nervous system, your sleep, your laughter, your self-respect. When you stop fighting, you start feeling again. You grieve, you process, you rebuild. You allow space for the broken parts of you to breathe instead of constantly defending your pain to someone who delights in denying it. Healing turns the volume down on their voice and turns it up on your own. It reminds you that peace is not something they can give or take away. It's something you build within, one boundary at a time. You don't need to prove how much they hurt you. You don't need to win the war to be free. You only need to choose yourself day by day, moment by moment, until the grip of the fight loosens and you can finally exhale. So don't fight, heal, because healing is the ending they never saw coming. And it's the only ending that belongs to you. Narcissists don't survive on love. They survive on supply, attention, emotion, chaos, control. They need an audience. They need a reaction. They need you to feel something, rage, heartbreak, fear, confusion, because your emotional energy, whether positive or negative, keeps their ego fed and their illusion alive. Every time you respond to their blame, defend yourself against their twisted narratives, or chase after their crumbs of affection, you are unknowingly handing them what they crave most: power over your inner world. But here's the truth. You don't have to fix them. You don't even have to fight them. You just have to stop fueling them. The moment you stop reacting, when you no longer get pulled into their drama, their baiting, their silent treatments, or guilt trips, that's when the shift begins. You stop answering the phone when you know chaos is on the other end. You stop sending the long messages explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stop defending boundaries that they were never going to respect anyway. You stop searching for closure in a person who feeds off your open wounds. And what happens next? They panic, not because you hurt them, but because you've become unshakable, boring, predictable, emotionally unavailable to their chaos. They can't play the hero or the victim if you're no longer in the script. They can't manipulate a reaction from silence. They can't spin your healing into a threat when you're no longer explaining your piece. You become still, and that stillness is not weakness, it's power. When you withdraw the fuel, you're saying, I will no longer spend my life managing someone else's dysfunction. You're reclaiming your time, your energy, your capacity to feel joy again. You're creating space for real connection, honest, mutual, healing connection, because the space once occupied by chaos is now being filled with clarity and peace. It's not always easy. Withdrawal can feel like grief at first. And on the other side of that grief is freedom. Freedom from the endless loops, from the confusion, from the self-blame. And that's what they truly lose, not just access to your attention, but access to the control they once had. So don't fight, don't explain, don't engage. Just pull the plug, withdraw the fuel, and watch how quickly the illusion fades without you holding it up. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors with locks. They don't keep people out, they keep you safe. They say, you can come in, but only if you respect the space you're entering. But when you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, boundaries start to feel like landmines. Every time you try to set one, you're met with guilt, gaslighting, or punishment. Suddenly saying, I don't like that becomes selfish. Saying, I need space becomes abandonment. Saying no becomes betrayal. And so what do? We apologize for our limits. We soften them, delay them, dress them up in explanations that sound more like pleas than declarations. We feel guilty for needing protection from someone who made us feel like they were the only shelter we had. But here's the truth. Real boundaries require no apology. They are a sign of healing, not cruelty. They are clarity, not conflict. When you begin to set boundaries without over-explaining or